Welcome to Wealthing Talks. I am your host, Alicia Castillo Holley, bringing you real-life conversations from Silicon Valley or somewhere around the world. We will talk about disruptors, angel investments, venture capital, and of course, family offices. Join me along with my children, their families, friends, disruptors, and investors as we explore the fascinating world of creating wealth in a completely different and authentic way. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Scott, such a pleasure to have you as a guest today in the Wealthing podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the initial question. What are you doing now, and how did you get to do this?
So I'm Scott Wharton. I'm the CEO of a company called Tandem PV, and we are making a next generation of a solar panel based on a completely new material science called perovskites. And it's kind of this miracle solar semiconductor that provides better performance and lower cost. And we actually manufacture in the US. So it's got a great combination of things.
Not only in the US, but in one of the most expensive places to manufacture.
In Silicon Valley, that's right.
There you go. There you go. So how did you get to do that? What happened? Did you wake up one morning and say, I'm going to do solar panels?
No, it's actually funny. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. So this is my fifth startup scale up in a row. But before I did that, I do not have a typical deep tech startup experience. Like I don't have the postdoc PhD and then founded a company. So I actually have a psychology undergrad and an MBA. And I worked in solar way back when, but it was too early to have that job. So I ended up pivoting and saying, what else do I like? And I said, I kind of like the internet when it was starting and going. So I was fortunate enough to do two early stage companies that were internet that became like voice over IP telecom. Both of them went public. The second company got sold to Cisco for $2 billion. Then I co-founded the world's first cloud video conferencing service. So I like to say 3 years before Zoom, a little early, ended up selling that company. And then I took my kids out of school and my wife and I backpacked with them around the world for a year. When I got back, my wife said, would you mind not doing another startup for a while? So I went to this internal startup at Logitech, the maker of mice and keyboards and webcams and so on. I took a small enterprise video conferencing group from very small to over $1 billion organically. So before I came here, I was running a $2 billion a year global manufacturing business. And I know we're going to talk about legacy and stuff, but part of how I was thinking, I was a little bored. I had that itch to go back to something earlier stage. And I wanted to do something that I thought would really help solve climate change. And I know we're not supposed to talk about climate change anymore, but the world is still heating up. And I thought that, the world needs some innovation to help accelerate our movement to move off fossil fuels. And I thought this was a great opportunity to do that and a great team.
So did you start the company from scratch? Did you find the technology? How did you get involved with this particular one?
Yeah, so about 3 years ago, I was at a conference. I met one of the investors, and he was telling us a usual conversation with the VC. Tell me about your portfolio. And he goes, I got the solar thing. Tell me more about it. It's perovskites. And like, what's a perovskite? I hadn't heard about it at the time. But so then I got more engaged listening to it. And then I met the founders. And then, they weren't looking for a CEO, but one thing led to another. And I realized that the two founders were brilliant, but more focused on the R&D side. And then I could come in and really complement them and help turn the company from an R&D company into a commercial stage company. And that's kind of what I've done over the last 3 years. We've raised almost $100 million. So I brought in about $80 million of that, built up the team. We now have more than $500 million of customer backlog. We have a factory that we're running, as you said, in the most expensive place in the world in California, but still works. So we're kind of poised to be able to really launch and commercialize this stuff. So we're on a great trajectory.
Wow, that's great. So I'm going to come back to that after the next question, which is your trajectory is not very straightforward. And I've seen that with many of our guests, and myself included. So I go to one place and I said, oh, well, no, I'm bored. I'm going to go that way. And sometimes it's very, very different. Sometimes it's an extension. But in this podcast, we reflect a lot about the lessons that we learn. Not everybody has the opportunity to go travel the world with their family. I did that twice, not for a year, but once for 6.5 months, once for 4 months,
It's still
with
pretty
my
good.
one with my kids, once by myself, and you learn a lot. But if you were to write your younger self a letter and say, hey, just one of those lessons, life lessons letters, what are the things that you've learned through your life that you didn't know when you were 20 and you think it would have been useful to know?
Yeah, so I would lay it out with the context that when I grew up, my parents were public school teachers in the New York City public school system. So I wouldn't say we weren't poor, but we didn't have a lot of means. We were middle class, and I wasn't surrounded by people that I am today that are doing a lot of these interesting things that have access to more money and opportunity. So I would say I was very worried about what exactly should I do and who should I be and worry about taking risk. And I think what I realize now, if I realized in retrospect that I would have kind of the success and means I have, I wouldn't have worried so much about it. I just would have kind of felt more comfortable with just doing something that I was passionate about and taking the risk. At the time, it felt very scary, and but everything ended up working out. I think partly because I allowed myself, and with luck, my wife Mariette, who's has been incredible supportive of me, to go and take these risks that ended up not being big risks because they ended up investing in myself in a way that I built up skills that one thing led to another, that allowed me to keep taking on both more interesting opportunities, but also led to success. I often took a job that had the lowest compensation initially, which is kind of counterintuitive. But because I loved it, or I end up being some combination of luck of picking either markets that were good or companies that were successful in teams, it ended up working out anywhere. I ended up making more money than I would have if something else. So I probably would have told my younger self, just relax, like it'll all work out. But I wasn't sure at the time. I was worried.
This is fantastic. I just had a meeting with yesterday with a Stanford student, and we had this conversation. And I told her, don't worry about it, but I'm going to send your podcast to her, so I'm not the only one. And I think, we want to be responsible about our means and our future, and sometimes society puts a lot of pressure on us, and everything turns out okay.
It's also really hard. I remember I had this one instance where I was traveling and I was with these German tourists who were a little older than me, and I was just agonizing. What should I do? In your early 20s. And they're like, Scott, stop agonizing. Just pick something and go with it. And it just kind of shook me up a little bit. It was like, yeah, you just have to make a decision. And then it's not the end of your life. It'll lead to something else. I was a little paralyzed by it. I think a lot of younger people are, because it seems like, wow, that decision you make, you have to live with forever. And you
Yeah.
kind of don't. You can take it, and then it's a step on a ladder. It's not the ultimate decision.
Oh, I love that. And I also like the way you phrase it, because not making a decision is a decision. And when you don't act, you don't learn. So you don't know what works and you don't know what doesn't work. And I see, especially in climate change, I see a lot of people talking and they say, well, but this might not work. Yeah, but if you don't act, you never know. So I think that that's a great context. You have to act. Well, I
I was
have to
also
act. I'm very
influenced by
inspired.
Tim Ferriss in the 4 Hour Work Week. He said
Uh,
he had this contract. So, what is the worst? He's the thing about this. What's the worst thing that could happen to you? And usually, the worst thing is, yeah, you just go do something else. It's not that bad. And I thought that was kind of an underpinning for me to just take chances and risk. Where I realized you catastrophize what some of the worst things are, and they're usually not that bad.
well, some things are bad, but usually they're not that bad. Yeah.
Yeah, like don't go mortgage your house and do other. I've seen other entrepreneurs do really stupid shit. Don't do that. But usually the consequence is you're a product manager or marketing somewhere else, and you try something new and it doesn't work. Guess what? You can go back and do your old job. Like they'll hire you.
Yeah. Or you can do work, or you can do, I don't know. Yeah, you'll figure it out.
Something.
There's a academic theorist called Sara Sarasvati, and she has a whole theory about entrepreneurship that is very, in my view, that's very progressive. And she talks about affordable loss. And she talks exactly about that. What is the worst that could happen? And she claims that a lot of entrepreneurs or serial entrepreneurs like you, like me, we don't spend a lot of time doing the business model, and because we know we'll figure it out. We do one step at a time, and then we pivot. It's easier. And I think that's a skill that a lot of young people need to have, because they think, well, maybe I'll make a wrong decision. And yeah, I mean, failure doesn't define you. So,
I mean, oftentimes, just a quick story. When I was at Logitech, I had a full-time person working on business cases. And I asked him, when is the last time you did a business case and it didn't work in the spreadsheet? He was like, never. I said, good. Stop working on that. I want the napkin version. It has to work on the napkin. And
oh,
go find something else to do, because a lot of times people will comfort themselves in the numbers. They're very specific and they're useless because you don't know what's really going to happen. But you have to have the core ideas and the framework. Like, do the principles work? If they do, go ahead. Don't worry about whether the spreadsheet works or not. It always works.
yeah, yeah. You just remind me a lesson from my dad. When I was making the decision to come to the US, excuse me, I grew up in Venezuela. We had a bank crisis, lost all the money. Not only me, 60% of the money in the banks disappeared. And this is before Chavez. And I'm in shock, because in 2 or 3 weeks, I have to come to the US. At the same time, I was bitten by a monkey. That's another very interesting story that came into my house. But my dad was a scientist, an intellectual, a professor. He thought money was a source of evil, by the way. He thought money is something that nobody should be worried about, because it prevents you from growing and intellectual stimulation and all of that. But, and he was very smart, but he said, you already made the decision that you're going to go. So how you get there and what you do is irrelevant, because you'll figure it out. And that's exactly is that capacity to go and take action that
Yeah.
makes life more interesting. And sometimes you have great horror stories too. So yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I didn't know that about your background. That story with the German tourists that happened in Puerto Ayacucho in the Amazon territory in Venezuela when I was down there. It's a whole nother story for us, I guess.
Oh my goodness, were you there?
I was there. Yeah, I was actually there during the coup, the first coup,
Oh,
the Chavez.
wow. Wow. You can imagine. Well, I left Venezuela before Chavez, but yeah, I have a farm in Venezuela, and it was taken away from me. My father had a
Mhm.
farm, my grandfather had a farm. So yeah. Wow, I didn't know that. Okay, so we need to do arepas and hallacas at some stage. Yeah. Wow. So let's get back into the podcast. And but this is the fun part. So you've worked with several companies and several structures. And I'm always intrigued, as a person that grew up socialist in a socialist country, and I was a scientist, which I was a very good scientist. And I always think that money is an illusion. We don't need money. We need things, and then we use money to pay for that. But money gives us choices. And I couldn't do what I do now if I didn't have my own money. But I always wonder, how do people create wealth? And that's why I have the Wealthing podcast, because one thing is about being rich, and the other thing is about being wealthy. And now, with all your experiences, if you can think about it, how do you think we can create wealth? How do you think you have created wealth? And what is that?
I think there's a couple areas that come to mind. So one is, I think people over-index on the company they work for rather than the skills that they have, and they think that if I work for this great company, it's going to protect me. And I think what we found even more so now, big companies are laying off left and right and shedding people. Whereas if you have some incredible skill that is unique and you kind of keep learning to build up that skill, it doesn't matter what happens with the company. You're going to be able to go somewhere else and be able to parlay that skill. So I would say don't over-index on the company that you work for and the brand. Over-index on the learning that you have and constantly adding a skill, because then you'll kind of be untouchable. You can either stay there or go somewhere else. And what I focus on is constantly learning and building up my skills and making sure that your skills don't get stale. And I think that especially happens when people get older. They get comfortable and go, well, I've worked for 20 years. And the answer is, who cares? What have you, as Janet Jackson said, what have you done for me lately? You have to have more up-to-date skills. The latest example is if you're older and you don't know AI, it's like not knowing how to work for a computer. You're just going to be
Absolutely.
made obsolete. And then I'd say the other thing is focus less on the salary and more on the ownership. So, um, and I think it's related to the first part. So every step in my career, I've been able to make more money because you have more skills. So what happens is you go on in your career, usually the money that you can make later in your career dwarfs the things that you do earlier in my career. So in retrospect, I think part of what I did is I invested in my skills that allowed me to have the next step to be
Mm-hmm.
able to make more money later. And the money that I made later kind of dwarfed the kind of the earlier money. So if you think about it as a long-term investment, you tend to do better by investing in your skills and being able to take a chance by going to some startup where you could do well or not. But I think a lot of people will say, oh, I'll make 10% more by going to this company. Yeah, but then you won't learn as much. Your skills won't be as useful.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll make more money in the short term, but you're cheating yourself in the long term. So I think people often will jump to a job for the wrong reasons and actually make less money through that.
So what you said is very interesting in terms of AI because in Europe, they're seeing AI as a great tool to reinvigorate the economy and to bring people into the workforce. And I'm an academic in entrepreneurship and venture capital. And when you study how the foundational structures in countries and cultures and the legal and the regulatory processes, the US is the best one to start a company for many, many reasons. Uh,
Mm,
but in some other countries, it's been very difficult to start. I mean, you come here and you have somebody that can do your cards, you have an accountant, you have people, you have the infrastructure of many, many people supporting you for a very reasonable price and with a lot of competence. And that's all changing thanks to AI. But in other parts of the world, you didn't have that. So if
mm,
I wanted to have somebody do, for example, brand exercise for one of my companies, and I started 18 companies. So one of my companies, I wanted to do brand repurposing. So a person in Latin America or in Europe would charge me $25,000. And a person here in Silicon Valley would charge me 2,000. And it's
right.
because the density is higher, but also they would be much better. Now, in those countries, it would have been much harder to set up the foundation of a company because everything is so expensive. Now with AI, they're seeing a surge of entrepreneurs outside of the US because it makes it easier. So they're very excited about AI, whereas we are talking about AI as a way that is going to reduce jobs. And we're looking at the negative side and they're looking at the positive side.
Yeah.
And when you mention about building up your skills in AI, it's very interesting to see your point of view and how are you personally applying that? How is your company applying that?
Well, I think the one of the analogies is imprecise, but when the PC revolution happened, there were a whole bunch of people that I'm sure you did and our listeners and I worked out where if you didn't know how to use a PC, you basically became obsolete as from a
Yeah.
skill point of view. So there were a whole bunch of new people came into the workforce that used PCs, and then these other people left. I think AI is like that, but 10 times that. That if you don't know how to use AI, your job will be automated away. But if you know how to leverage AI and use it, you're like a superhuman with 10 times the productivity. So how do you learn AI? So I think that, like in the computer side, if you go to do a course, it's going to be obsolete already by the time you take it. I think the key is you need to be tinkering and learning and constantly almost playing with it and finding out what works and doesn't work, especially because it's changing so fast. So part of what I've done personally, like as an example, I just built an AI chief of staff for me. And a year ago, I looked at having an outsourced person doing it. Now I have AI doing it for me. I wrote all the agents myself, and I am not a coder.
Hmm.
I just did them, and now I have all these things that I used to have maybe someone making six figures now doing for me every day that I taught myself how to do. And then when I think about it for the rest of the company is I want everybody thinking about, all right, how do they take their job and then they have a choice. You can have a human doing stuff for you, or you can have an AI token. And there are human tokens and AI tokens. And you should think about the trade-off of which one do you work for with the bias that seeing what you can push the envelope with on the AI side. And the people who are really good at leveraging AI, their value every day is going up in the organization. The people who don't use it, their value is going down. So if you want to make sure that you are, I'll just say 5 years, because who knows what's going to happen beyond that. you need to be really embracing it and just learning it, but playing with it, not like formally, but
Yeah.
thinking about how do you leverage it as a partner and a coworker rather than as a threat. And I think if you do that, then people are going to be very well off, but there are going to be a whole bunch of people whose jobs are going to be automated away.
Yeah. And they will figure out something else to do because people are
Maybe.
not going to, they, yeah, because at the end, you figure out what to do, whether you push into it or you pull into it. It's just nature. You're not going to sit down
Yeah.
and say, okay, well, yeah, until you run out of your savings. And they said, okay, I need to do something. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, the closing question is a more philosophical question, and it's about our essence. So one of the things that I talk about is an accident that I had when I was 13. I fell off a horse and I died, but I didn't die completely. So
Mm.
they sent me back. They said, no, 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 we don't want you here. But I saw myself dead. And I thought, wow, life is really a gift and it can go like that. But ever since that happened to me, I started thinking, what do I leave? Who am I when I'm not here? What is my essence? What do you want? What do I want to be remembered by? How do I use this gift of life for something, uh, whatever it is? And that is my question to you. So, have you thought about what is your legacy? Who are you when you're no longer here? Who are you for the people that come and listen to this or watch this and they have never met you, but you're there for them in your essence?
Yeah. I mean, I guess three things come to mind. One is that I think there are a lot of people who think that the goal in life is to retire. Like you have enough money and you do this shitty job that you don't like and you work really hard and then you retire and then they go retire and go, that's it. That's all life is about. So part of what I try to do is do things in my life that are either both work that I love or doing things in my life, like not waiting for when this retirement, like you have to do things that really inspire you now, both personally and professionally. So I decided, let's not wait. I'm going to focus on if I'm not, and I think Steve Jobs had this famous speech at Stanford where he said, if you look in the mirror and more than a few days go by or weeks go by and you're not happy, then you have to go change it now. Don't just sacrifice the present for the future. I think that's a false choice. So maybe that's number one. I think the second thing is the Japanese concept of ikage. So, and I think you know that, but for those who don't think about it, you have to think about if you're passionate about something, but you can't make any money on it, let's say you're a musician, well, that's really tough, right? So you have to be passionate about something. You have to find something that people are willing to pay you for. And then the third thing is you have to be good at it. So I've tried to find this combination where I'm doing things that I really love. I found things that I have a skill that people are willing to pay me for. And then I'm good at it. And what I found is I'm a really good entrepreneur and organizer. And then I would say, maybe there's four things. I want to, when you're going through life, make sure that you do it in a way that you are building on people and being a good person by helping people. There are a lot of people who are both, quote, successful, but they trample on people and they're not liked. I think I want to make sure that I'm helping people and giving back to people and mentoring to people. And that part of my legacy is people will not only say that I was successful in business, but don't and then say, but they were an asshole. Like they would say, Scott was a good person who really helped people. It wasn't just successful there. And then I said the last thing, and this part of why I'm working on solar panels is I think I didn't want to only look back and say I was successful and just adding more money in my bank account. I wanted to do something that made a dent in the universe. So I feel like through some of the choices I made, I worked with small teams, which basically made telecom from $10 a minute to free, which
Mhm.
really helped the world to communicate more. And then I basically helped productize video conferencing, where we basically helped through the pandemic people survive and thrive through that. And now do what we're doing now, where so many more people are in live, they're enriched, where you could work anywhere or be places with that. And then now I said I want to help solve climate change, and not enough people are doing enough to do that. And I said I want to take a chance and take a huge compensation cut to be able to do my part and use my skills to accelerate that. So I think the thread through all of that is do something that is meaningful and impactful, but also I want to get paid for it too, and not have to, and have my cake and eat it too. And I think so far I've been very lucky and been able to do that, and hopefully I'll be able to continue to do that.
That is really, really useful. I mean, I could hear myself in your voice talking to my dad, as because I was an academic, I was a researcher, and I said, I want to have a car that doesn't fall apart. My car was 14 years old, and I knew how to fix cars, but it got to a point that I'm like, hey, I would like to have a car that I don't have to fix all the time because it's more expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great lessons. Thank you so much. Any
Well, can I just
last?
add? Can I add one more thing? I
Yeah,
think
go ahead.
so. Wealth. What is wealth? Because that's one of your has parent questions. I think wealth to me is not about the stuff that you can buy. Although I like everyone, I like stuff. To me, it was always about freedom. So having money was not about the things I could have. It was about I want the freedom to make some of these choices to do these things, whether it was take a year off and travel around the world without knowing how to do that, or going to a startup where I didn't have to worry about taking a huge compensation cut. Like to me, and not having to worry that if my family was sick, like to me, wealth is about freedom and buying it. And the things, they come secondarily, but they're not really as important.
Yeah, no, I wrote a book called The 10 Unwealthy Habits, and I was very interested in happiness at a point of my life because my kids were growing up, and I could see the epidemic of unhappiness in teenagers. So I was very
Mm,
concerned about that, and I thought that poor people in the poorest areas, they're happy with nothing, and it's about expectations and not knowing. And then I know because I've lived in very poor areas. I lived in Caña de Azúcar, where the Tren de Aragua was formed, and people were incredibly happy. They were happy if they were able to have a meal, and they were happy
mm,
to share a meal as well. And I don't think money gives you happiness, but worrying about money takes away your energy from enjoying life. And so that was the triangulation that I did, and I like having the choices that not only money gives you choices, talent gives you choices. So when you talk about skills, it's talents, because there are musicians that are very well taken care of by the world because they
yeah.
add so much beauty and value. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do people contact you?
Scott at tandempv.com
Okay.
is my
Well,
email address, or find me on LinkedIn, and happy to hear from anybody listening here.
thank you so very much for being with us.
Thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. A pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. It's a little bit different to the conversations that we had before because it's very much embedded into work. How do you find your work? How do you make sure that you get paid, which is a necessity. But I like Scott's twist about working for your passion. I think you shouldn't be wasting your time in something you're not passionate about, because the whole purpose of working is to be energized by your work, not to be de-energized and then to come home to replenish your energy at home with your family or by yourself. So if you have a job that you love, then you're completely energized all the time. Thank you so much for being with us. This is your host, Alicia Castillo Holley, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to our Wealth in Talks. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. To stay connected, visit us at wealthing.com. This is Alicia Castillo Holley, your host, and until next time, yours in Wealthing.